Okay, we are live.
Perfect. And I do see Isaac. I do see Isaac on now, so I think maybe we still do the same order. That's okay, Chairman.
Do the commissioner first, you're thinking, then Isaac?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We'll call this meeting to order. The second agenda item would be the public comment. Just scrolling through, I don't see any public that I noticed. Do we have any? If you do, please unmute and speak up. Okay, hearing or seeing none, we'll move on to the third item. We'll start with Commissioner Powers Gardner. Do you want to give an update? Comments that you have?
Yeah, you guys, yep, you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, awesome. So last night I was able to speak to a couple of people about this. I was able to talk to Senator Jake Andrick, who's the floor sponsor. And Jake informed me that this bill is being pushed by the governor's office and it is a priority for House and Senate leadership. So what that tells me is that focusing all of our efforts on killing this bill is not going to be productive. Instead, we should focus on modifying the bill in a way that doesn't adversely affect us. The insight he was able to give me is that that there's some areas of the bill that we're going to be able to work with, like if we're able to say second-class counties with less than 200 homeless people don't need a full-time shelter, then that will make us not have to have a full-time shelter, and they're okay with that. But the area of the bill that they are most likely not willing to compromise on is that counties of the second class need to have an emergency shelter during Code Blue days. That area, I don't think that they're going to compromise on, but he did say that they would be open to saying that a nonprofit could run it. So for example, if like the Food and Care Coalition or the United Way or another organization was willing to facilitate an emergency shelter during Code Blue days, we could use our funding to support them. So so that was one of the other questions I asked him is, okay, well, where's the funding coming from? And that's also something that they would be willing to work with us on. Some of the funding will come from third-class cities as defined by the Homeless Coalition from the sales tax revenues. And from what I read in the bill right now, what it says is that will be automatically deducted from those cities' allocation of sales tax. And then that money would be directed at the direction of the homeless committee that COG appointed. And they're giving a ton of flexibility for who's on that committee. The other thing that I've asked for specifically is there's a bill right now that's separate than HB 499 that deals with the fifth. And right now, the fifth is used for transportation and transit. And it sunsets on June 30th. And there's a bill right now that would take away the sunset on the fifth and allow counties to enact that later. And Salt Lake County has asked that counties of the first class be able to use the fifth in that bill to modify it so that the fifth could be able to be used for homeless services. So I talked to folks from Davis County last night. I called two of the three Davis County commissioners and the Davis County auditor, and I talked to UAC. And Davis County would like to say, if this bill passes and we're required to do emergency shelters, that counties of the second class also have the flexibility to use the fifth to pay for emergency homeless shelters. And UAC has agreed that they'll add that into their requests. So so really just the updates are there's a good chance this is going to pass anyway. We should focus our efforts if we can, we should focus our efforts on trying to make it so that we don't have to have a full-time shelter And so that we emergency shelter. We want to be able to have a nonprofit run that emergency shelter. And for funding purposes, we would like to possibly be able to use the fifth for homeless, so that we as commission, if this happens, then as commissioners, we could vote for the fifth and use it for homeless services. Beyond that, those are really the updates I have. I was able to talk to Utah counties, several of our lobbyists, 2 of our 3 lobbyists last night. They are going to be, there's a meeting at 11 o'clock today in Senate Room 210 for stakeholders to discuss this bill. And 2 of our 3 lobbyists are going to try to make it there, assuming they can get to the Capitol unscathed in the weather. UAC is going to have several members there, and Davis County will be there as well. Okay, so those are my updates.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure if you can see. Molly Wheeler from the league has her hand raised. I'm not sure if you can see that with your setup.
Yeah, I'm on myself. Thank you. Molly, do you have a comment before we go to Isaac?
Sure. Thanks for letting me join in. I just wanted to clarify really quickly some of the provisions of the bill, and with also what Commissioner Powers Gardner just mentioned. As of right now, it is our understanding that the second-class county provision is not for a year-round permanent shelter. It's to have essentially emergency overflow capacity from, I want to say it's November 15th to April 15th. And at least in our conversations of what that could look like, it could look like what has been discussed with what was just mentioned, of having a nonprofit running, of expanding existing services. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then as well, I know that Commissioner Powers Gardner just mentioned the fifth, and there are 3 bills that you need to be looking at if that's what you want to do. Right now, HB 500 deals with this for everyone. HB 260 has a component for just Salt Lake County, and HB 175 is the bill that extends the sunset. So if that is a provision you want, just be aware that there are 3 bills floating around right now that deal with the fifth, and to make sure that you have your folks getting the provisions you need into all 3, because right now it is unclear which one's going to move forward, if they're going to get melded together, anything like that.
Okay, thank you for those updates as well. Hopefully people got those written down and we'll pursue those. Isaac, you want to give your update?
Sure, although I do notice Mayor Johnson's hand up if you want to be aware of that.
Not seeing hands, sorry. I had to get it. Mayor Johnson, you want to speak up before Isaac?
Yeah, well, yeah, and this is just a question because I've been wondering this a lot. We keep talking about distributing the fifth in places, in a number of places, which indicates it's really needed down in Utah County. And I appreciate Jake Andrig in attendance here today. And so he may be the only one that can help answer this question. But our state finds themselves with a bunch of extra money, and they want to give some of that money back in the way of tax credits or whatever. And I'm just curious why we don't use the state doesn't use some of those tax credits to help fund this, instead of putting the burden on the counties, which I agree, this is something that needs to happen. But it'd be nice if those tax dollars came from the extra money that the state has, instead of putting it on our shoulders when we have so many other financial responsibilities in Utah County.
Can anybody give insight or answer to that?
It's a great question. I wish I had an answer to it.
Do you want me to opine a little bit? This is Senator Andregan. Excuse my dress. I'm not very senatorially dressed. I was out shoveling a little bit. So that's a good question. I think it's important to understand that the fifth is far from being a done deal when it comes to, number one, can it be opened up to be enacted within a time frame by the counties? I believe that is where we're headed. And then the question is Senator Lincoln or Senator Kurt Colmore's bill. It's not HB 265. I think it's Senate Bill 265. I think that was a misspeak by the person from the league. What they're talking about doing is they're talking about opening up that fifth quarter, which is not quite a quarter. It's 0.2. So it's just under a quarter, but they're talking about opening it up to 0.05 of that to be used for things with mental health and homelessness. And then 0.5 of that to be used by the cities. And then I think 0.5 to or 0.10, if you will, to be used by the counties. And that's far from being a done deal. It's Representative Kay Christopherson's bill. I think that's HB 500. And forgive me if I'm getting these numbers wrong, because honestly, yeah, that's right. HB 500 and Senate Bill 260. I'm getting them wrong just because at this point we have too many freaking bills. I can't remember which is which, but Representative Christopherson's bill is looking at the fifth quarter utilization across the entire state. Well, really, counties the first, second, third class. So those are the two. Now, so the question is to Mayor Johnson's question is, could those funds be utilized to do some of these things? That's exactly the conversations we are having right now. Those of us who are very heavily involved in transportation issues, like myself, across the state, are a little leery of letting Salt Lake County or any county opening that up for mental health, just because when it was originally enacted, it was meant entirely for transportation dollars, specifically around transit. And so it's all part of the discussion and negotiations. Salt Lake County obviously is asking for the flexibility. Salt Lake City would like to see the flexibility as well. I will note that as part of this homeless discussion with House Bill 499, which I am the Senate sponsor of that bill, the flex emergency housing really is the crux of this whole thing. And what's interesting is the bill that I was the sponsor of last year that kind of put that into place to force Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City's hand. And Mayor Mendenhall fought it tooth and nail. And then what happened? We had 6 deaths the second week of January with that really cold spell that came in. By the way, one of those deaths happened here in Utah County. So even though HB 499 really is admittedly kind of really primarily focused at Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City, there is an element of this that really we need to figure out how to coordinate better, which is why I'm part of the conversation with you today. So we're having 2 conversations. Can we use these funds to help address 499? I do think we have got to work better under our coordinating councils for homelessness to have emergency housing. Like, for instance, let's all look out the window right now. I mean, where do you think some of these people are sleeping right now that can't get access to emergency shelters? I would not be surprised at all if we hear of some additional issues, deaths possibly. And so the question is, what do we do? We're not trying to heap this on, well, we are. I mean, that's what everything the legislature does is kind of like, you're all nails and we're hammers, right? And that's not good policy. But it is also, you know, how do we help each other kind of coalesce around a game plan to get stuff done? I do think it's best done if you all get together and figure this out. I would prefer that to be the case. And I'm just going to be the first to say thank you, especially to Provo for enforcing your no camping policy. And I hope that I wasn't misinformed. If you're enforcing that no camping policy, you've infinitely made your lives easier. But we still have to figure out, what do we do when temperatures drop below zero, you know, for long periods of time? What do we do with these people? You know, and I don't mean to get religious on us, but you remember, if you remember anything from the New Testament, the Savior said, you always have the poor with you. You're never not going to have the poor and the homeless with you. So how do we better coordinate that? So as the bill sponsor, I'm just going to say, we're still negotiating. How do we maybe open up some of these resources to go to how do we address the 499 provisions? And with the 499 provisions, you have my word that, and I met with Commissioner Amelia Gardner, Powers Gardner yesterday, that we will work through what needs to be worked through on this. We're trying not to be a hammer on Utah County, but it's hard not to be a hammer on Utah County, but be a hammer in Salt Lake County. Because Salt Lake County really is, especially Mayor Mendenhall, it's just like, and what did she do after those 5 people died in Salt Lake County? Oh, she immediately called for emergency flex housing. And it was like, duh, that's exactly what we were talking about last year that you fought so hard against. So there's my 2 cents. I think the funding aspect of this is far from certain. We're not done yet. So we can definitely have some negotiations, and the full implementation of 499. I mean, now that it's coming from the House over to the Senate, yeah, we'll have some conversations. We will be making tweaks to that bill, which is why I'm part of the discussion today. Is I'd like to figure out how we can achieve the goal without being too much of a hammer. So,
Mayor Staley, can I have a quick follow-up?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just Jake, and I think I understand the situation. I understand what you're doing. I think all the mayors I've talked to in Utah County, we're certainly sympathetic. And even more than that, we know what's coming. You know, we're growing down here. There's not much we can do about that. We just can't stretch our arm out and stop that from happening. We need to get in front of it. I don't think anybody is disagreeing with that. The question is with this growth, we're shouldered with a lot of the financial burden on how to deal with it, and to be able to take one of the tools that fifth quarter, whatever we're calling it, and be able to move it for this. I appreciate your support in having that as part of the conversation. And like, state, just you pay for it, because we've got our own burdens down here financially, but we want to help.
well, and if I may, sorry to jump back in, but there is the 2 distinctions on the bills. Senator Collamore's bill, Senate Bill 260, is specifically for counties of the first class. And that's the only bill that is talking about opening up this to be used for homelessness and mental health issues and whatnot. Kay Christopherson's bill has absolutely no provisions in it whatsoever to allow counties of second, third, and fourth classes to do that. So this Senate Bill 260 came through our Transportation and Infrastructure committee last night, standing committee, and we had this conversation with Senator Collamore. Is there any movement to combine those 2 bills? So, and he said there is. Senator Harper is the chair of transportation, and he's working with Kay Christopherson on that bill. And he's kind of being a little territorial. I mean, honestly, he's like, I don't want to combine these 2 because he likes some of the provisions. And Senator Harper is also leery of opening those transportation monies up for these type of services. So just understand that there's potential to combine those 2 bills into a single bill, and to extend the provisions of Senator Collamore's bill to all counties that have options for the 5th quarter local option sales tax. So just understand the nuance there, that those discussions right now, if Representative Christopherson's bill passes, it may grant greater flexibility for the 5th quarter, but it has absolutely no provision to use those monies for homelessness or mental health services. It's Senator Collamore's bill that is the one that's doing that, and that's specific to Salt Lake County, just to be clear. Currently.
Okay, thank you. Isaac, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can ask a question, I mean, we could get into kind of more of a presentation of all this, but to cut to kind of the chase, since we're so grateful we have Senator Anderegg on the line, I guess the question I'm wondering is there any appetite for, because you talk about hammers and nails, and I appreciate your candor and your discussion on that. As it sits, this would be a hammer to a nail, saying that Utah County will have an operating shelter. It's an extended out date, and we appreciate that. But is there any appetite to say, okay, before we even tap that nail, let's use the upcoming months and let's have the homeless coordinating council, or whatever the names of these groups are, come and talk to COG, and maybe we go tour some facilities and everything else, and maybe we can have it be less of a hammer nail situation and more of a, hey, we got it. And to be candid, the fact that you have the hammer with the nail ready to go is always motivating to everyone. It's one thing if you just ask us if we want to come talk, and we probably say, I'm kind of busy. But if you say, we've got the hammer and the nail ready, would you like to talk? Absolutely, we'd love to come talk, but hold off on tapping it just yet. And is that better for everyone maybe to just hold off this session on actually tapping the nail, and instead let's explore this and know that if we don't show you what you need to see really quickly, then the nail gets applied and we move forward that way. Is there any benefit to that? Is that a fruitful discussion?
Whenever if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, sorry, I don't mean to just assume, but whenever we're talking, thank you. Whenever we're talking about policy, hammers and nails, obviously it makes sense for us to sit down and talk. The unfortunate aspect of this with the bill that we ran last year is Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City are a year ahead of you guys as far as having to deal with the implementations of what we passed. Specifically last year, what we passed was really earmarked, targeted at counties of the first class. So yes, let's talk. Yes, let's figure out how to do this. What is unfortunate for you and the other second and third class counties is that maybe we can craft the bill such that it's specific again to only counties of the first class, but then that doesn't necessarily address the need. Salt Lake County only got to where they got to this year because of what we passed last year. That being said, we're not gonna, my preference is that governance is best handled at the most local level possible. That really when we intervene, it's because there's some sort of aspect of politics or culture that doesn't allow the type of coordination, or there's just pragmatically it doesn't function the way it ought to function. So if we can be helpful in facilitating that, I think the whole idea with pushing the implementation date out was to basically still kind of poise the hammer over the nail, saying, yes, we're going to implement this, but we'll have a session in between now and full implementation such that if we need to remove the hammer, we can at that point, but then that kind of holds people's feet to the fire. That's obviously all part of this discussion and part of this negotiating is what, people I found are very motivated when they feel like there's something impending, right? Now, that being said, I'm talking primarily about Salt Lake County. Like we really are, we have an issue in Utah County. We know that our growth is going to compound this issue. And this is an issue that we're not ever going to walk away from. This is going to be an issue we're going to have forever. And it's only going to. So how do we get out ahead of this? And I think that's what Mayor Johnson's questions really are. And I think to your question, Isaac, is how do we give us some time to implement us, give us, figure out how best to move forward. We're more than happy to do that with the delayed implementation time and whatnot. But it is hard in legislation to say we're going to treat one county one way and another county the other when you've had a death down here. And so some of my colleagues, I represent primarily Utah County. I have a small sliver of Salt Lake County, but all the other 104 members of the legislature, 103 members of the legislature represent other areas. And so we all come at this from our own specific viewpoints. And so can I get the rest of my colleagues to be as understanding? Yeah, potentially, because I think they are also dealing with their own nuances as well. But it is something I will say, I think Amelia nailed it, where this is really being driven by the governor's office of economic opportunity, the Commission on Economic Opportunity and House and Senate leadership. This is a bill that in some form is going to pass this year because it is being completely driven by leadership. And so at this point, my role as the Senate sponsor, now that it's coming over, is how do we make it workable? And how do we give you guys the space in which you can function and get stuff done? I will say this, one of the biggest things that you guys need to do down here is to implement a full-fledged, fully functioning coordinating council that could plug right into your AOG and the COC to make sure that you're getting it.
Chair, can I add something?
I was going to go to Andrew first, Julie, and then you. I think
Okay.
that was Please go ahead.
I'll be just real quick. Hearing what Mayor Johnson was saying, you know, this could be, the funding for it could be, if we're going to pull back the sales tax on food, if the state is, just not pull it back as quite as far as completely gone, and use a percentage of that then for to fund the homeless, versus needing to implement a new tax in order to do that. If it's maybe just not repealing the other tax quite as much. That's just my comment.
Thank you.
Well,
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that since last session's bill came out, several of us got together. I sit on the COC for Utah County, and we got together with Provo and Marsha Judkins and a few other people and started forming a group with the COCs in order to do research on this. And after several meetings with COCs around the state, we were able to get some criteria put together for what to present to COG and MAG on homelessness that we could take to the state. And we've invited the league to come down and work on this. And there's even a grant that could come through a policy institute to research how to better implement this in Utah County. And so when we're talking about setting up those plans, I feel like they're already in place. And so if we're looking at that and we're wondering where we are on that level, we're pretty far into it at this point. And UVU right now with their policy institute has a grant that they're interested in starting that discussion, just to give some better context for our mayors.
Okay, thank you for that, Julie. I'll be honest, I don't know where to go from here. I'm probably the most removed from this, not physically, but also the.
Could I hop in with another funding option consideration for everyone? As we're looking at this right now, pardon me, we are also looking at expanding the mitigation fund with an additional $2.5 million of local contributions to be matched by another $2.5 million of state contributions into the mitigation fund. Those dollars go directly to the local governments to help offset the impact of shelters in their communities, but it's also phrased with a lot of flexibility that the localities that receive those funds can spend them kind of as they see fit. There's a current provision in the bill that allows tier 3, which would be this overflow funding, to be used for operations. As the league, we don't love that because we pretty firmly believe that operation dollars should be for operation dollars and mitigation dollars should be for mitigation, and they shouldn't be, you know, mixed between the two. But that certainly is something. An additional provision of this bill increases the size of the tier 3, this overflow fund, to be 10% of the fund rather than just 5% of the fund right now. So there are additional dollars growing, and then the pie is growing, and then kind of the slice of the pie for those overflow is growing as well. I can't guarantee that it'll be wholly sufficient. That's been the problem we have with the mitigation fund overall, but that is another potential funding piece of the puzzle to consider as you're looking at this.
Could I ask a dumb question? This may right. You know, that mitigation fund, do we already as cities, part of our sales tax goes to that mitigation fund, does it? And are we just talking about more of that coming from the sales tax? Yeah,
correct, Mayor Wright. And not a stupid question. So essentially, a couple of years ago, the state determined that homelessness is a statewide issue. However, those crisis shelters probably wouldn't be statewide. They'd be regionally focused and focused within a few jurisdictions. And so the precedent that was established was you either host the shelter or pay into the fund to help those shelter cities offset their public safety impacts. So you're right on the money.
Okay, thank you.
From my perspective, if I may, Chair,
Please.
and I appreciate your, letting me sort of present on this. There's so many issues here, and there's a lot we could talk about. A lot of it is probably best discussed at the league meeting at 11 o'clock for a lot of the details. The one thing that I think is our best opportunity right here as COG is to talk about whether there's any formal COG response to this, to one piece of it, to the hammer and nail that says we will have an operating shelter Now, and for the timeline, just so you know, we have to have a plan in place by August 1st, 2024. So it does give us a lot of time to make a plan, and then we implement the next year. But again, that hammer hits the nail and the clock will roll, and we will have an operating overflow shelter. It's only temporary. It's not a permanent long-term housing situation. Does COG have any response to that? Is it a request that you don't quite tap that nail just yet? Is it a full-fledged, we oppose this and whatever that means? Is it no response and we just lay low? That to me is the key issue we could try to tackle today. And I don't know what the right answer is. And I'm happy to have discussion on that. Again, there are lots of other pieces to this homelessness puzzle, and we could spend all day talking about little aspects of this or that. But I think what this meeting is probably, and again, know that the session ends next week. So we don't have we could call another meeting. We could talk by email. We don't have to decide anything right now. But that's probably the most fruitful thing we could do is see if we coalesce behind anything as to the requirement that we have an operating shelter in Utah County, of a particular type, or is that something we just kind of let happen? And I don't know what the right answer is, but if anybody would like to speak to their feelings on that, I think that would be a productive use of our time. And I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on this if we're feeling like we're done on that piece, and we can, address other pieces later. And if someone wants to talk about another piece, this is your meeting, not. I'm just trying to facilitate a little bit.
It does seem to me that general consensus is not just lay low, right? It feels like we need and want to respond in a, hey, give us more time, or adamantly oppose. Is that at least the two things that everybody's at least lean towards?
I would agree. Yeah, Mayor, I think we need to be engaged. I don't think we lay low, and it sounds like there's some negotiation that's possible. So I think we need to be engaged. Mayor Johnson, do you have any comment? I know you're closely tied to this.
Well, I'm agree with Mayor Wright and everything else. I mean, as I mentioned, we want to participate. The concern is we need to have enough time to work with all our legislators to make sure that where we get the money from is appropriate, and our plan is appropriate. I know Provo is doing some wonderful things over there. So, we need a year.
Senator, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I would, for my 2 cents, and take that for all that it's worth, okay? The timeline on this, I think Mayor Johnson is exactly right. If the plan is not needing to be kind of baked until August of 24 with implementation in 25, I believe, my own feeling, and unless people disagree, that should probably give you the runway that you will need to get an implementation put in place. I will also say the design of that was twofold. That we will have a session in the first part of 24, which would allow the legislature to consider additional mitigation funds. And we will most likely have another session in early 25 before this is fully rolled out or implemented. And we will also look at more mitigation funds there. So to Mayor Johnson's point, there needs to be kind of an ongoing funding source to do this, because we know we're going to have this for decades. But the short-term ramp up, those mitigation funds could be utilized. My understanding is in that way. So I'm hopeful that the passage of this bill is still suspending that hammer above the nail, saying, let's all move together. So my advice to you would be, let's engage and let's sit down and really put a good game plan together through 2023 and into the early part of 2024. And let's hit this head on. Let's have a game plan, and let's get a good working game plan that meets everybody's needs. And we kind of determine how we're going to go after this as a county, and how we're going to make sure that the state also helps guide and provide the resources needed for full implementation. That would be my 2 cents. Thank you.
Okay, Tom, I think you're next.
Yeah, thanks so much. One of the thought is that you're correct. The scripture is exactly right. There always be poor, and that will increase. The problem we have is that there are those who do look for homeless shelters to get out of this weather, and there are those who did not want the shelters in the first place. I've got a family member in exactly the same way in another state. He lives in the woods, and I'm curious as to why that person died. I read about it, I know about it, but I don't know the conditions of it. What I'd like to see is that we work more as a team between the county, cities, and the state, and this and other issues, and not just use a hammer, because all we're creating is animosity. The cutting back the state tax piece, yes, that's separate from the cities, and the counties understand that. But if we could avoid it cutting the sales tax so much, we could have put a piece of that aside for funding, grant funding perhaps, to those areas that need it most, and still cut the tax back and allow the cities and the counties to catch up to where the governor believes we should be. If the Utah County is at least is doing very well, it's not perfect, of course, but we're coming far and above from where we've been. And so I'd like to see us work more unitedly, more coherently with each other, and not just beat us over the head with these types of processes, and at the same time cutting funding sources that could have been used or applied to this very topic. I'm in Salt Lake still. I've got a meeting at 10. I've got a county commission meeting at 2, but I sure like to be able to get to that meeting up in, at 11 o'clock. I'll have to get with you on that, Jake.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Molly, can you be brief, please? You're muted.
Thank you. Two provisions of the bill, as well as that the LHC works with OHS to determine what the overflow need in Utah County is. And so I don't think, at least in our understanding of the bill, it's not a state mandate in the sense of OHS saying you must do this. It is OHS working with what the existing need is to determine where that goes. And one thing as well that became very apparent to us from the league in the Salt Lake County process is that currently in state law, there is nothing to stop the state from preempting local land use to place a shelter in any state-owned property right now. And so one provision of this, and I with the league, obviously, we wholeheartedly agree that it needs to be a partnership between the cities, between the counties, between the state and service providers. But the sense that we have gotten as cities is it's time to come to the table or risk being on the table, and you can kind of help shape your destiny, or it can be shaped for you. And so I just wanted to put that all out there.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments at this time?
Molly, is it okay if anybody here, any comment on who's invited to that meeting at 11 or how they would join?
Yeah, absolutely. So I put the link in the chat to register for the webinar. I know that given the weather today, a lot of folks will probably be joining via the webinar. So that is a Zoom link to register there. You are all welcome to join any relevant stakeholders. So just self-identified. If you care about this bill, please join us. It's going to be with the league. It's going to be with UAC. Wayne will be there. Senator Andrick, you're more than welcome to join us. Representative Elison may join us. It's during floor time, so I don't think we'll get him, but it'll be in Senate 210 or on the webinar link. So either way you want to join us, please join us. We'd be happy to have you and happy to gather that feedback.
Can you send that webinar link out to our emails, or how is best to access that?
Matt can do that. We'll do that right after the meeting.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Isaac, do you have any recommendation on how we proceed? Do we wait till the?
Is anybody wanting to make a motion of any kind? Or, I mean, you know, I guess, do we feel a consensus that we would prefer that the component of this bill that does set in motion that we will have an operating shelter in 2025 not be in this bill, but that instead that piece be held over our heads but not as part of this bill, because, you know, it's all about status quo. Yes, we could probably argue once it's in place that they should amend it. That's a very different lift than just leaving status quo. You know, and anyway, so I'm open. Does anybody feel fire in their bones one way or another on this? I'm not a voting member of this either way, and we knew the issue was coming and appreciate that everybody would get together and we could talk about it, but it's really up to you elected officials if any of you feel strongly about any direction on this, or you know, we can table it and see if in the next week or so we want to figure out another way to come up with a formal position, or never come up with a formal position. So I'll maybe leave a little pause here to see if anybody wants to lead out on what they think is the right move.
I was thinking that you might be the one to draft something up, but I'd like to know how others feel.
Mark, when you say draft something up, are you saying
Draft up a letter, our position for MAG.
You know, Amelia had some scenarios there that might be worth following up on as well with information she presented.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say that maybe what we say is the part of the bill that requires us to create a committee, we are totally fine leaving that in the bill, and let's give us a year with a committee. So like maybe what we ask is, hey, let's leave the part in the bill that gives us a committee that creates a plan for Utah County that follows the Utah way of think locally and act locally. But we ask that the section of the bill that requires an emergency shelter be pulled out this year. And if it's necessary, we put it back in next year for counties of the second class. So what it would say is counties of the first class have to have emergency shelters, and they have to enforce their public camping ordinance in order to qualify for the funds. And counties of the second class need to start this process by creating a council that comes up with recommendations for their local communities. But what if we say that that's what we want our letter to say, and then we can have Isaac eloquently articulate that for us.
This is Mayor Packard. Let me just add one thing to that, and that has to do with just the funding of it.
Yes. Yeah. And then for funding, we ask that the funding come from a sales tax revenue, that we don't reduce the sales tax as much and we utilize that money.
Brandon, you have your hand raised. Are you ready to make a motion?
I just basically wanted to point out, it's been like 12 years since I sat on the community action board, but everything that I was ever taught was that I don't like the 200 beds in this bill, that thou shalt have 200 beds. So I just want to point out that our best success in Utah County has been with 30, 35 bed housing places. Just want to point that out. And so, and having leadership there, you can talk to local leadership of some of these. Having someone there has decreased our police presence a lot, like from 3 calls a day to 3 calls a month type stuff. It's really helpful. So I just want to make sure that stuff's included. That's all.
I have a question. Because Utah County has a working group and they are doing something right now, what if a plan happens where we come up with different structured housing, where when we do become a first-class county, we don't necessarily need this bill to implement something like that? How do we go back and change that later? I mean, is that just another session where we say, we add something at a later time that says, well, they came up with something, and so now first class counties aren't forced to do this?
I think that's probably a valid point. I'm getting a little concerned about time and making sure we come to a conclusion here. So if I may, my interest is just clarity, so I know what I need to do. Do we have a motion? I think the clearest I heard towards a motion was what Commissioner Powers was saying. Is that a motion?
for us?
Yeah, I'll
Commissioner-
make that a motion.
Yes,
Please.
and I can certainly second that, yes.
Can you just give us the highlights of that motion?
I can try.
Yeah, the highlights are that what we are asking is that the emergency shelter provision only apply to counties of the first class with a homeless population of greater than, Jake, do you have a number that we could go with? Or that I would say that it only apply to counties of the first class, that it have but it also has a trigger of a homeless population. Because when we become a county of the first class, if we don't have 1,000 homeless people, maybe we don't need it. So I would say that the emergency provision only apply to counties of the first class with a homeless population of, let's come up with a number that seems reasonable. And that counties of the second class just need to have an action group working on the issue to come up with local solutions.
Could you add something, Amelia? Could you add
Yeah.
something? Could you add something that says if there's not an actionable plan that accounts for X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, so counties of the second class need to have a committee, and if they already have one, like we do, great. And if they don't, then they need to come up with one that has a plan by 2024.
No, I mean,
then
for the
the
first
funding
class
aspect
city,
of-
first class city has to have a homeless shelter or whatever, up to whatever number, unless they have an actionable plan that meets such criteria.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I guess let's look at the bullet points. So bullet points are number one, is emergency shelters only apply to counties of the first class that have a homeless population of X. Number two, first class cities need to have a homeless shelter unless they have another plan. And cities of the second, so bullet point number three, counties of the second class need to have some sort of a committee that creates a local plan for homelessness. And then fourth point is the funding for this should come from a sales tax revenue. And before we have to implement a new tax for it, let's look at redirecting some of our current tax instead of reducing it, redirecting a portion, a fraction of a percent to homelessness. So
Yeah,
I'll
motion is
second that.
We have that motion with
Isaac has to articulate.
And that tax, Amelia, would be a state piece.
Okay, I have a motion. I believe I have a
You have a second.
Can I
please without looking.
just make one point on the sales tax portion?
Briefly, please.
So, the sales tax portion that is going to be taken off from the state's portion of this is only going to apply to the state's portion. Sales tax, as I understand the bill currently, is not going to affect the local portion of this. So even if we do away with sales tax on food, I think it's only applying to the state's portion unless that provision of the bill has changed. So if we do away with the sales tax portion, it shouldn't affect the local portion. So the question is, if we do away with the state's portion on that, and then you guys will still probably have to enact an increase, the net effect is still going to be a decrease to consumers, but you guys are going to have to take additional action. It's not something that the state, unless we don't do a full with repeal. So my 2 cents.
Commissioner, does that change your motion? Commissioner Power Gardner, does that change your motion at all?
No, I mean, Jake, would you have a suggestion on if we should change the motion and how we should change it based on that?
I think having the flexibility to be able to do it, you already have. If you're asking the state to say, hey, we're going to decrease the sales tax, but we're going to keep a portion of the state sales tax that is going to be earmarked for homeless services, that's a whole nother discussion on tax cuts that I can tell you is going to be really hard to get me and my colleagues on board with, not because it's not a good idea, but because we're not there mentally as a body. So what I would recommend is that I don't think you need to modify your motion. You just need to be aware that if we do indeed remove sales tax, it's my understanding is it's only the state's portion of that. You guys will have to go back in and implement a sales tax increase on your portion of it that you can earmark for this.
Well, my ask would be that the homelessness, my ask would be that the homeless be covered out of the state portion, because homeless people from all over the state come to the Wasatch Front because that's where the resources are. Like there isn't a soup kitchen in Juab County. So people who want to be homeless in Juab County are coming to Utah County, just like there isn't an ICU in Juab County. So people that need an ICU are coming to Utah County. So I'm okay. So that's kind of my ask, is that we have the state portion cover these homeless services, because they're really serving the entire state's homeless population.
You're not wrong. I'll just say with 8 days left, it's probably hard to get that implemented.
One last thing.
But now a key, Senator, while I have you, a key to my motion on counties of the first class is that it's counties of the first class with a homeless population of XYZ. The reason that's really important is because if we do a really good job with a homeless mitigation plan in Utah County, when we become a county of the first class, we may not have a need for a homeless shelter with 200 beds, because we enforce our public camping ordinances and we have a mitigation plan with Wasatch Behavioral Health. So just, I'm going to make that, I wanted you to recognize that in the bill, if we can say counties of the first class with a homeless population greater than XYZ, whatever that correct number is, so that it motivates us as Utah County to have really good mitigation strategies so that we stay below that threshold.
Okay. Sounds like we have a first, a second.
And if I can just comment that I'm interpreting this motion as one directing me to write a letter that, as best as I can recall and my notes can do, captures what we've talked about here. But I don't want to get in a weird situation where we have a motion that did these bullet points and the letter might be a little different, and that's a little problem. So I think the motion comes down to directing a staff member of, the city to come up with a draft that tries to encapsulate this and circulate it. And then when we feel like we have enough consensus, we'll send her off.
I think we're okay with that.
Yes, and I think that all of us have confidence in Isaac's ability to articulate our thoughts.
Yeah. Okay, so can I get let's put on this. All in favor, unmute, speak up, say aye.
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 Okay, anybody the contrary? Hearing or seeing none. Sounds like we're unanimously in that. Okay.
Mayor Staley, this is Mayor Olson. I just wanted to make sure one thing, and I've been thinking about it as we wrap this up and voted, and it's probably too late, but I really wanted to make sure that Isaac had made a great point, and that was to take away 2024 as a deadline. Can that be added into this? Is that another motion we'd make?
That's right, Isaac, that we wanted more time if possible.
The motion as stated would take away that deadline.
Oh, that's good for me then. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor, can I just comment? It's Mayor Kafusi here.
Please.
First of all, you're a champ for running your first meeting. Thank you. You learned nothing from me, but you're doing awesome.
Thanks.
And thanks to everyone that was willing to jump on this call. When we were made aware of this, we just knew Utah County needed a voice. And in order to get organized quickly, this seemed like the safest path. So thank you to Michelle Carroll and COG for letting us all get together and have an opinion. This is how we work, right? No one knows what goes on in our cities better than we do, and in local governments where it's at. So it's a little tricky being told what we can and can't do. My ask would be to Jake and all the others and the Wayne Niederhauser, come on down. Let us show you what we do in Utah County. I would love to host you, and other mayors will come to your cities. Let's show you what we're doing. Let's get around the table and let's collaborate. That's what really needs to happen. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. Bye.
Thank you. Looks like he might have dropped off, so he might not have heard that, Michelle, but I'm not sure. So as I'm scrolling through. Thank you for those comments, though. I appreciate that. Okay, we'll go to number 4, our other business. I think the only other business we really have is our next scheduled meeting is April 6th. Unless there's any other comment, I'll motion we adjourn or entertain a motion we adjourn. Do I have one?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Go shovel your snow on the ocean. We're going to go just mow the lawn. There's all sun and rainbows down here. So take care of it.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.